We want to thank Dr. Chu and her team at the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus for actually serving to work in conjunction with us to actually help put this together. Next, I would like to introduce Congressman Stephen Horsford. He was born and raised in Las Vegas, was elected to the United States Congress on November 6, 2012, as Nevada's representative for its newly created 4th Congressional District. Congressman Horsford is the first person to hold this seat and is the first African American to serve in Nevada's federal delegation. Congressman Horsford comes to Congress with experience serving in public service as a bipartisan legislator who is a strong advocate for middle-class and working-class families. In 2008, he became Nevada's youngest and first African American state Senate majority leader. Impressive. Congressman Stephen Horsford.
Good afternoon. First, I want to thank Dr. Maya Rocky Moore for that very kind introduction and for the invitation to be here. And I want to thank the Center for Global Policy Solutions, along with the Insight Center for Community Economic Development and the Ford Foundation for hosting this year's Color of Wealth Summit. The discussion, the work, the collaboration that's happening here, I hope will push this Congress and future Congresses and legislatures across the country to take seriously the issue of the wealth gap that exists in this country. And that's what we're here today to discuss, this wealth gap challenge that's facing millions of people of color throughout the United States today. And I hope that the conversation will also come with solutions that we need to galvanize a more profound national debate on the issue of racial wealth gap in this country. The findings of the GPS report are striking. People of color in the United States have less than one dime of median net worth for every dollar of white median net worth. One dime compared to $1. Wealth more than income protects families from inevitable hardships, and this great divide in wealth has contributed greatly to many of the problems that are facing our communities of color, including the educational skills gap, poor health and the health disparities, as well as long-term family stability. Now, I may be the first person of color from Nevada's congressional delegation, but I won't be the last. And I'm not standing here as a member of Congress just as the success of a person. I grew up in poverty, raised by a single mother, the oldest of 4 kids, and so I've lived the impacts of poverty in my own life. And my mother, who now is celebrating 20 years of being clean and sober, faced drug addiction when I was a young boy. And my grandmother, having suffered a stroke, relied on Medicaid and disability to care for her for 27 years in a nursing home until she passed away in April of 2000. I share this with you because the impacts of poverty are real. They're real for the people who are struggling in that situation, and they are real for the communities that it affects. But it does not have to be the determining factor for individuals for their lifetime. And that's, I think, what this conference is all about. For most African Americans and Latinos, unfortunately, a checking account is their only form of a liquid asset. It prevents people from being able to invest and grow their wealth at safe and secure rates, and to be able to take the risks that are necessary to ultimately lead to greater economic opportunities. Instead of secure investments, many working class families, particularly families of color, their wealth is linked to the value of a car, which depreciates each and every year, or a house, which is heavily reliant on the volatile housing market and can quickly leave a family in debt. These are circumstances that are far too familiar for me in my home state of Nevada, which unfortunately has the most unstable housing market in the country. We were part of the big boom where we had home values appreciating nearly 20% a year for over a decade, and then we were a big part of the bust. And unfortunately, we led the country in home foreclosures, and as of today, 40% of the homes in southern Nevada are upside down in value, some of them as high as 50%. Now, for communities of color, that's even more drastic, particularly those who got their home loans through predatory lending practices, which were with these high rates or adjustable mortgages, which have caused people to literally not be able to afford the mortgage on their home, or the equity that they did have, they lost. So our communities of color are in some ways trapped in this vicious cycle, living paycheck to paycheck, drowning in debt from predatory loans and mortgages and decreased home values following this crisis. In fact, 50% of the collective wealth of African Americans was stripped away as a result of lost home values following the recession and predatory loans, according to the report you issued. This is due to the fact that 60% of African Americans' wealth is linked to housing. That's why I'm very pleased as a new member, just recently appointed this month to the Financial Services Committee and yesterday to the Housing and Insurance Committee, to have a focus on what this Congress can be doing to address the housing crisis, and I look forward to your suggestions and recommendations in that regard. Because it's this vicious cycle that has kept millions of minority families from obtaining financial security and that have prevented them from being able to climb that economic ladder. The crisis so many families of color are facing is a shared crisis, however, and it has a large impact on the United States economy as a whole. So in order for our country to grow and to remain the wealthiest nation in the world and to be prepared to succeed in the 21st century, we need to make sure that the solutions that are in place to help people of color to be able to rise up that economic ladder and join the middle class, that solution and those solutions are good for all of America. We must, as a nation, confront the reality that we are failing to create a system of opportunity for all, which has a direct effect on the ability to grow and sustain wealth. The ability to succeed in the United States should be determined on hard work, not by the position of society that you were born into, or by the color of your skin, or the zip code that you live. This failure of opportunity has systematic explanations and has been developing since our country's founding. You all know this. Minorities were institutionally restricted from having access to wealth accumulation largely until the Civil Rights Movement. And though explicit institutional discrimination has subsided somewhat, the wide gap in wealth between families of color and white families is still a reflection of a more discrete, systematic, and social barriers that have limited this economic mobility. And so when we hear from people like Representative Paul Ryan, who the Congressional Black Caucus met with yesterday to talk about his budget, we ask him very clearly, how does your budget reflect these institutional barriers? How does your budget address the fact that it's not the culture, quote unquote, of the inner cities and blaming the victim, but it's the policies of this country over generations that has contributed to the disparities that exist for so many communities of color and people of color. We're still waiting for an answer, by the way, from Chairman Ryan. But we will continue to ask those questions because those are the fundamental questions that if they're not answered, we won't ever really be able to get to the root cause of the issue. So from the GPS's report, it is clear that this crisis is a result, as I said, of numerous systematic challenges, and there really is no one solution. The most important part is that we are actively engaging in this topic and that you are here to work together, policymakers, experts in your field, and community members, and that we address these problems going forward. The government can help. There is a role for the federal, state, and local government to close this growing wealth divide between white and minority families. And we have a responsibility to act. We cannot ignore this growing problem any longer while another generation comes and goes, never able to leave the depths of poverty. The national budget is a vehicle that reflects our values through which public assets are protected, funded, and strengthened, whether it be Social Security, Medicare, the unemployment insurance, SNAP, Head Start, Pell Grants, a host of number of other important programs that are economically viable and important to closing this wealth gap. So too is the America's tax system, which greatly rewards those with wealth and investments, while those living on low wages end up paying similar, if not higher, tax rates as millionaires and billionaires. Another flaw in the Ryan budget proposal. So we must implement a fair and progressive tax code that does not discriminate against the millions of Americans who do not have the ability to grow and sustain wealth, and ensure that we do not end up making the 1% even wealthier. So these are some of the challenges that we are facing. I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues in the House to make sure that there is an action plan, and I look forward to your recommendations and the work of your research to help inform that process. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here to speak with you today.